Hello, I'm Paul LaRoche, and this is Hidden Heritage. In the last episode, I announced that in 2025, I'd be narrating the chapters of the book, Hidden Heritage, the story of Paul LaRoche, as a special series on this podcast. Each episode will feature a chapter from the book, narrated by me, with personal reflections and updates woven into it to give it a fresh perspective. But don't worry, we're not straying too far from the heart of what made Hidden Heritage what it's all about. This book series will be interrupted occasionally with our regular episodes, bringing you the same diverse stories and cultural insights you've come to expect from this podcast. By sharing this story, I hope to offer you a deeper understanding of my journey as an adopted child, my reunion with the Lakota culture, and the creation of Brûlé and our mission to bridge cultures through music. It's my hope that these chapters will inspire you, just as they have inspired so many people over the years. So whether you're a long-time fan of the book or hearing it for the first time, I invite you to join me for this new chapter of Hidden Heritage. Together, we will explore the personal and cultural threads that weave the story of Brûlé and perhaps find new ways to connect with one another along the way. Join me now as we kick off this new podcast series. Hidden Heritage, written by Barbara Marjak, narrated by Paul LaRoche. Chapter 1. The Whipped Cream Kid. At 38 years of age, Paul Summers located a biological brother, only a year younger than himself. Paul and his wife, Kathy, along with their two teenage children, Shane and Nicole, were planning to meet this newly discovered brother. The past couple of weeks had been a flurry of phone calls back and forth between Minnesota and South Dakota, between the Summers and the LaRoches. Phone calls between blood brothers. The simple drive from Minnesota to South Dakota was a journey from one culture to a new one. The Summers left one family they'd known all their lives to meet blood relatives they'd never known. The journey uncovered long-buried secrets. Clarence and Irma Summers lived in the picturesque village of Worthington, a thriving rural community of approximately 1,400 people in southwest Minnesota. Surrounded by farmland, the town was full of middle-class homes, tree-lined boulevards, and spacious parks. With beautiful Lake Okabena centered in the heart of the community, Worthington almost represented a Midwestern Norman Rockwell lifestyle. Clarence and Irma, now middle-aged, owned a sage green 2-story house on Westlake Avenue, directly across from Lake Okabena in the Cherry Point neighborhood. Friends and neighbors liked them as two of the kindest, warmest folks around. Clarence worked as a plumber for Montgomery and Foskey Plumbing and Heating, and Irma was the bookkeeper. In their early years, they enjoyed dancing and loved going visiting, a common form of entertainment before television invaded everyone's living rooms. Childless for many years, they stayed active in church and community events, and grew large flower and vegetable gardens. In 1946, the couple opened their home to Irma's sister, Verena Linster, after her husband died. Clarence even had a large addition built into the house to accommodate Verena and her 11-year-old daughter, Yvonne. By this time, they were making a comfortable living, but their hearts longed for little footsteps to fill the big house. In May 1955, Yvonne graduated from high school and later moved to Yankton, South Dakota, to attend the X-ray technology program at Sacred Heart Hospital, leaving the three adults alone in the spacious home. Clarence and Irma were about to give up hope of ever having a baby when their prayers were answered. word came of a baby boy at St. Mary's Hospital in Pierre, South Dakota, available for adoption. Originally from South Dakota, Irma was very familiar with the Pierre area. They made an appointment to see him and fell in love with him on the first visit. Immediately, they began the adoption process. Following their attorney's advice, they filed a certificate of birth for the state of South Dakota Department of Health, listing their son's name as Paul Edward Summers. 4 weeks later, on July 30th, 1955, they brought the little boy home under the temporary status as foster parents. Next came a 6-month waiting period until the legal paperwork between South Dakota and Minnesota could be completed and the adoption finalized. A few years later, the hospital called again with another boy needing a home. This little boy was over a year old and needed surgery on one of his feet. Without hesitation, they started the adoption process and named their second son Mark Joseph Summers. As soon as they brought Mark home, they wasted no time in seeing to his medical needs. Irma quit work to stay home with the boys. Always a meticulous housekeeper, she wasn't about to let children change her habits. With her home now complete, the garden got smaller as she kept busy with 2 rambunctious boys underfoot. Verena, a school cafeteria cook for many years, did most of the housekeeping for the family and filled in as second mom, looking forward to Yvonne's occasional visits. The extended Summers family fell into a comfortable routine. Clarence came home every day for lunch. Even at the young age of 6, Paul looked forward to his dad coming home in the middle of the day. One day he arrived home carrying a box that looked like a suitcase. "Come here, Paul," he said. "I've got this for you." Paul watched as Clarence opened up the case and took out an accordion. He strapped the contraption onto Paul's small frame and loosened the bellows. As soon as Paul's fingers touched the keys, a wondrous musical sound came from the strange instrument, lighting up Paul's eyes. He immediately started taking lessons. By 5th grade, he entered the talent show at St. Mary's Catholic School. It was a nerve-wracking event for Paul to walk out on the stage in front of the entire school and give his first public performance. But at the same time, it instilled a quiet confidence in this young, influential character. The Summers did their best to provide a loving home for Paul and Mark. The boys' younger years were filled with family picnics, camping, school activities, and church. The house was filled with plants, including Irma's rare African violets. Delicate glassware and antique dishes lined the shelves and hutches. Clarence turned the basement into a recreation room, which became the cool hangout for the boys and their friends. Paul and Mark always got along, even though there was 5 years separating them. Mark was a little more mischievous, which sometimes got him into trouble. One Christmas morning, the 2 boys couldn't wait any longer to open their presents. They raced out of their bedroom. As they neared the stairway, Paul threw something over the railing into the living room, trying to beat his little brother downstairs. The sound of breaking dishes froze Paul and Mark in their steps as an entire row of Irma's teacups crashed down from the shelf. When questioned a minute later, Paul panicked and took advantage of his little brother's reputation. "Mark did it," he cried, never owning up to it. As the boys got older, they enjoyed crossing the street to Lake Okabena, where they could spend endless hours swimming or fishing. One year, the Summers family took a 3-week vacation with a pop-up camper, visiting popular destinations as they headed north and west. They traveled through the Canadian Rockies to Banff National Park and Lake Louise. They continued further west into British Columbia and to the Pacific Ocean. From there, they followed the coastline to Oregon and back through Yellowstone into the Black Hills. Even with all the incredible sights, Mount Rushmore made a lasting impression on Paul as they stood in front of the massive monument, literally carved out of the mountain. Paul and Mark loved the entire trip, viewing each day as a new adventure with exciting places to explore. Paul's musical interest expanded from the accordion to the piano and to the organ that sat in the enclosed front porch. With a window view of Lake Okabena, Paul spent many hours practicing and making up songs. On warm summer nights, he loved to play his music, watching the moon come up over the lake, windows open, letting his mind wander. The next day, Paul would often hear comments from the next-door neighbors. "Hey, Paul, nice concert last night." Dabbling in every kind of musical genre available, Paul spent his teen years in the heart of the rock and roll generation, and on Sundays played the organ at St. Mary's Catholic Church. Life was good, and Paul flourished under the comfortable roof of the Summers house. Irma was extremely proud of Paul's musical gift and often asked him to perform impromptu recitals for her company. Paul happily obliged, sitting down at the piano to play a song or two for his mother's friends. With a wink and a grin, his fingers raced across the keys, not even needing the sheet music. In Irma's eyes, Paul fit the nickname she bestowed upon him, the Whipped Cream Kid. Paul always knew he and his younger brother were adopted, but both assumed they were the same as everyone else in Worthington, white. As a youngster, Paul's tall, slender frame often stood heads above the other boys of his age. During the summer months he tanned nicely, but the brown always faded during the winter. With a mother's protective instincts, Irma attributed Paul's deep-set eyes and dark features to French-Canadian roots. That answer worked for Paul. He didn't need to know anymore. Now a junior in Worthington Senior High School, his days were filled with typical school activities. Ironically, Paul didn't make the high school band and instead poured himself into organizing his own rock and roll bands with friends. He was the lead vocalist and keyboard player. One such band, Scarlet Sun, played all the top 40 songs of the early 70s, and Paul could closely imitate most of the popular singers. His best friend, Matt Standifer, gave him the befitting nickname of Hums, while his other buddies called him Studley. Paul's band played nearly every high school dance, and all the girls knew the popular lead singer with the charismatic smile. Clarence then converted the basement recreation room into a band room for Paul and his friends. With his friend Jack Leslie on bass guitar and Kevin DeFries on electric guitar, Craig Silver on drums, and Paul on the keyboards, the four boys rattled Irma's dishes upstairs during every practice. After all, the unspoken rule for every rock and roll band was to be loud. It was a common occurrence on warm summer days to find the Cherry Point gang hanging out together. Paul Summers, Matt Standifer, Greg Hagewer, and Mike Graff. A typical afternoon meant swimming and water skiing at a friend's house on the lake. Paul kept hearing about a girl named Frisch, and he wanted to meet her. When Paul showed up at the lake one day during the summer of 1972, between his junior and senior year, his buddies Matt and Mike were already playing the game horse in the water. Each boy held a girl on his shoulders. Each horse and rider tried to wrestle the opposite rider into the water. Paul watched from the dock until they came out, laughing and out of breath. A pretty girl with an engaging smile and long blonde hair that he hadn't met before immediately caught his attention. "Hi, I'm Kathy Frisch," the pretty blonde said. "Hey," he answered with a shy grin, "Paul Summers." Just then, someone's little brother asked to be thrown into the lake. "Help me swing him," Kathy said to Paul, as the young boy rushed out of the water. Sure, Paul said, getting into position across from Kathy. Come on, let's go, he said to the boy. Paul grabbed the boy's other arm, and he and Kathy began the count. 1, 2. Paul locked eyes with Kathy, and in that very instant, something clicked. 3. Kathy yelled, and they both let go. The boy flew several feet into the shimmering blue water, sending a splash in all directions. As usual, all the teenagers congregated in the house looking for something to eat. An old upright piano in the living room caught Paul's eye, and he sat down and started playing. What are you playing? Kathy asked, sliding onto the bench beside him. Just a couple of songs from the Eagles, he said, making room for Kathy. Do you know how to play? I actually played the violin for a while. Hey, you want to learn a song? Sure, she smiled. What are you going to teach me? Put your fingers right here on this key, he instructed, and copy me. Paul played 5 notes and paused for Kathy to echo. Good. That's it. This song is called Color My World by the group Chicago. The hours slipped away, and by the time Kathy said goodbye, Paul was hooked. He quickly found excuses to show up at her house, and in a short time they were officially dating. Even on their first date, she wasn't afraid to bring up the subject of Paul's unknown heritage. You know you're adopted, right? She asked. Paul and Kathy were spending a mild September afternoon hiking the trails at Camden State Park, a few miles west of Worthington. Brilliant blue filled the overhead sky, the midday sun catching on the maple leaves that were just beginning to turn golden yellow. Well, yeah, Paul answered, leaves scrunching under their boots as they followed the trail. Don't you want to know who you are, where you came from? She paused with a smile. Paul laughed it off. It really didn't occur to him to pursue it or even give it much thought. His mom and dad, Clarence and Irma, loved him unconditionally, and that's all that mattered. If anyone mentioned Paul's dark complexion, Irma always reiterated the French-Canadian connection. End of story. Paul and Kathy found a spot to sit along the Redwood River. A few leaves slowly filtered to the ground, some catching in the mild breeze. They spent the next hour talking and sharing their dreams for the future, holding hands as they revealed their heartfelt passions. Something in Kathy's sparkling blue eyes melted away walls Paul's might have otherwise put up around girls. She was warm and open and easy to talk to. It's music for me, he said. I want a family, Kathy simply said. As usual, the afternoon disappeared far too quickly, so they ended the day with plans for another date. Paul and Kathy continued seeing each other after Paul graduated from high school and began attending Northwest Technical School in Hopkins, a suburb of Minneapolis. He came home every weekend to see Kathy, and by December of Kathy's senior year, Paul knew she was the one, and officially asked Kathy to be his wife. Both the Summers and the Frisches encouraged their son and daughter to wait until Paul was done with trade school before they married, and the young couple complied. Deeply in love and ready to conquer the world, Paul and Kathy exchanged wedding vows at the First Lutheran Church in Worthington on May 17th, 1975. Paul's great friend Bill Potts sang the song The Greatest Gift, a song Paul had composed for Kathy. Paul got his first job in the engineering department with the city of Worthington. Even though Paul had earned a 2-year degree in drafting, his intentions remained to pursue a career in music. Paul learned the city street infrastructure during the day and pursued his musical options at night. Kathy wanted to start their family soon, and on August 20th, 1977, Shane Michael was born, weighing in at a whopping 10 pounds 4 ounces. 2 years later, almost to the day, August 28th, 1979, Nicole Marie Summers completed the family unit. The young family of 4 settled into a house on Westlake Avenue, a few houses down from Clarence and Irma. Kathy understood Paul's passion for music and fully supported his professional music aspirations. She knew it wouldn't be an easy way to make a living, but firmly believed in her husband's talent and determination. Bottom line, she was willing to make choices that might have otherwise been hard on a young couple with 2 children, even if it meant furthering Paul's chances at success. Clarence helped Paul transform their basement into a music studio with various recording equipment and instruments. As a toddler, Shane often wandered downstairs to watch his dad play music, inquisitive and curious. It didn't take long for little Shane to earn his first nickname. "Shane? No!" Paul shouted as Shane's unsteady feet stepped onto a guitar, snapping the neck. "Shane! No!" was a common response when his sticky fingers reached for the keys. Pretty soon, when someone asked Shane what his name was, he would say, "Shano." Nicole, too, was drawn down the steps as a little girl. With coloring books and crayons in hand, she was content to lie on the floor and draw, listening to her dad's music. Throughout the early years, the Summers made several moves, always in support of Paul's career. In the 1980s, Paul played in several clubs in the Twin Cities with great success. One such job was playing the piano at a club called Howard Wong's on the 494 Strip, a section along the I-494 freeway in the suburbs of Bloomington, Richfield, and Edina, where several popular nightclubs and restaurants were grouped together. For a while, the money was good and steady, but lean times always followed, and for periods they had to rely solely on Kathy's income from various administrative positions. For over a year, Paul played at Prior Place, a club in Prior Lake, just southwest of the cities. While there, he built quite a large following and became a soloist for a band he formed called Interpreter. Next came a move back to Worthington, where they opened their own little nightclub called Paul's Place. With the success of Paul's Place, someone suggested taking that same scenario and opening a club in Denver, so the Summers next relocated to Colorado. Unfortunately, what had worked in southwest Minnesota didn't fare so well in the mile-high city. When Paul's parents' health began to fail in 1984, Paul and Kathy felt the need to return to Minnesota. Doctors had already detected cancer in Irma, and she underwent a mastectomy. Paul relied once again on his engineering background and found a job as a civil engineering technician at Meyer Stewart and Associates. This was located in Minneapolis, where his former boss, Craig Ebeling, now worked. The private consulting firm was well established, with the municipalities surrounding the Twin Cities designing local highways, city streets, water systems, and resolving environmental concerns. Paul stayed with relatives and commuted the 3-hour drive to Worthington on weekends, while Kathy and the kids stayed with Irma and helped her around the house. Not long after, Irma suffered complications from a blood clot in her leg, and doctors found it necessary to amputate her leg. Following Irma's surgery, Verena moved in with her other sister, Sylvia, so as to not create a further burden for Clarence. Watching his wife endure so many hardships, Clarence did his best to help her through the difficult nights and days. Meanwhile, Kathy's father, Dick Frisch, developed a serious heart problem and was in need of a transplant. And then, without warning, on September 28th, 1986, Clarence died from a heart attack. At the funeral, Irma confided to a family member, "If I ever needed him, I really need him now." Her heart forever broken. Irma passed away the following April. A mere week after Irma's funeral, Dick Frisch underwent transplant surgery. Kathy and Paul were overwhelmed with the loss of both parents and the odd stress of her father's surgery. Too much, too close together. Long before he was ready, Paul found himself at the house on West Lake Avenue, sorting through his parents' belongings. He wandered from room to room, his heart aching. A sense of peaceful familiarity arose from the tiny flowers on the African violets still perched near the window. Mark and his wife, Lori, were there as well. Both Paul and Mark picked out a few items of sentimental value, trying to split up the heirlooms between themselves and their cousins. But what would they do with all the rest? The only answer seemed to be an auction, and it was sad to think, at the end of 2 wonderful lives, that their parents' lifelong possessions would go to the highest bidder. Immediately following Irma's funeral, Paul had to return to work in Minneapolis, while Kathy and the kids remained in Worthington until the house was sold. With Lori's help, Kathy continued to sort through Clarence and Irma's belongings, preparing items for the auction. One afternoon, Kathy sat down at Irma's desk, a kidney-shaped writing table with beautiful carved decor and curved legs. She reached into the back of the drawer and pulled out several envelopes dating back to the mid-1950s. One was dated October 5th, 1955, from the Department of Public Welfare in St. Paul, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Clarence J. Summers. A second letter, dated January 26, 1956, was from a local attorney to the Division of Child Welfare in Pierre, South Dakota. "These are about Paul's adoption," Kathy whispered, scanning the letters. She unfolded the letters and began reading. "Oh my goodness, here's his name. Arlen Faye LaRoche." She couldn't believe her eyes. She found his birth name. Kathy simply couldn't wait to call Paul that evening and tell him of her discovery. Maybe Paul would want to trace his biological family. Kathy searched the rest of Irma's books and didn't find anything else. Nothing even about Mark's adoption. "Have you seen these before?" she asked Paul that Friday evening when he came back to Worthington for the weekend. "Not now, Kathy," he said. "I can't. I need time." Losing both parents so close together took an emotional toll on Paul. As the days turned into weeks, he knew it would require a lengthy healing process. Kathy fully respected Paul's grieving. After all, she too was grieving for Paul's loss. She tucked the papers away until he was ready. After matters were settled with the parents' estate, Kathy and the kids joined Paul in the Twin Cities. Paul and Kathy found an apartment in Eden Prairie and enrolled the kids in school, dragging Paul's makeshift studio equipment along with each move. Even though Shane struggled a bit in elementary school, he shined when it came to sports. Recognizing his talents, Kathy signed him up each year for baseball and hockey. Pitching and goalie were his favorite positions, and he excelled at both. Nicole took an interest in music and began playing flute in school. Kathy set up auditions with the Greater Twin Cities Youth Symphony, which Nicole successfully passed. The next step was private lessons with Judy Ranheim, a well-known professional freelance musician and teacher. As the family settled into a suburban lifestyle, Paul tried his best to adapt to life at Myers Stewart. By now, drafting with T-squares, rulers, and pencils had been replaced with a computer CAD system, which necessitated Paul switching positions. Now, as an inspector, his duties meant being at the job site every day, serving as the eyes and ears for the engineers in the office. Even though he was at a construction site, he still needed to represent the company in a professional manner, and arrived each morning in casual clothes and work boots. Paul usually started his day at the office for a short meeting and then headed to the job site. He reviewed the raw plans and used the instruments to calculate the progress. Each summer, Paul inspected 4 to 5 large projects, working closely with each contractor. The Minnesota construction season ran from fall to spring, leaving the winter months when he was laid off to focus on his music. For a while, things moved along smoothly. Kathy's interest in the medical field led to various administrative jobs in healthcare to help make ends meet. When their 6-month lease was up, Paul and Kathy decided to purchase a house and found a nice modified 2-story in Eden Prairie so the kids wouldn't have to change schools. Paul readily acknowledged that Kathy's strength and maturity kept the family on track throughout the ups and downs of the late 1980s. Even though he was still working at Myers Stewart, Paul was simultaneously collaborating with his musical friend Jerry Schmidt from Minneapolis on an instrumental New Age recording project that they called Towards the Sun. Over the years, Paul faced continual battles to survive in the real world and to survive as an artist. Although in and out of regular jobs in different bands, Paul's enduring love and passion was for music. Paul and his family reached a low point, however, when the Towards the Sun project fell apart before the album's release. With his own financial and professional pressures mounting, the sinking feeling in Paul's gut told him it was time to give up the music. He simply could not carve out a career in the field he loved and provide a decent living for Kathy and the kids. He knew in his heart he had tried everything imaginable to make it work, and it simply hadn't. All his resources were drained, physically, financially, and spiritually, and there was nothing more to pull from. Much like the thundering crash of a cymbal marking the end of a symphony, his dream was gone, shattered in tiny pieces, and reality was staring at him head-on. Yet something continued to tug at the depths of his soul.